Choo choo! Hop on board, folks, and experience the energetic journey of a lifetime. Remove coffee and bad energy formulas from your life because Gamer Supps is the Grand Orient Express rolling into the station right now. A ticket has never been cheaper, as you can get 10% off your order with the code Thorin, Thorin, at gamersupps.gg. Try the white grapefruit, nice delicious flavour. Now, in early 2021, Valve removed Train, DE Train, and replaced it with a new map, Ancient. I think that has actually somewhat spoiled CSGO ever since and was a big time mistake in both directions of the move. I think that bringing back Train is one of the keys, I would say, to settling the map pool, bringing balance back to the two sides, reinstating some core fundamentals of what makes for great matches and great teams in the world, and meaning that the top teams can actually have the 5 map deep pool, not just have like these wonky 3 or 4 maps. Like the amount of top 10 teams that just don't have a map pool or can just run into the wrong underdog. This is an angle no one brings up, right? When people talk about all these underdogs because of the partner system and tier 1 teams are out of touch, and also, you know, they've grown arrogant and they're lazy and they're only playing against each other. How about the fact that we have Ancient, Anubis and Vertigo in the same map pool? Maps that just generally can't be relied on, don't produce classic maps, aren't fundamentally good maps, and in general, no one really enjoys these maps. There's a few teams go into the Vertigo if they believe in it. A couple were picking Ancient and a few were using Anubis largely to punish people, or if they were crazy underdogs just gambling. But these aren't the best maps in the game. They just aren't. And so let's just start with Train. It was the wrong decision to remove this map, in my opinion. Like, I liked both versions of Train, the old version, the rework, but this rework, it was one of the best maps in the game. It produced some of the best games of Counter-Strike and series. It was back and forth, and most importantly to me, it produced a lot of classic games and big time performances you can remember. Like, to me, one of the things about this was it was a classically CT sided map, but good teams could really get busy on the T side. You could really punish teams that were quite weak on CT in a way that actually on a lot of the other CT-sided maps, you can't. A lot of the other CT-sided maps, classically, are CT-sided in terms of like the way the map plays generally, and as a result, it makes it easier to play CT-side. I would say this was a CT-sided map, but we actually had to know what you were doing, and that a really good T-side team could make you look very silly. Like, to me, this is a map that, as a result of its CT bias, showed which teams had really good entries. If you have some amazing player like Electronic who can run out the alley, yeah, you know what? You can suddenly open up that out of sight. If you have a player who's great at dropping down the ladder room, all of a sudden it's a different game for the outside defense. If you have that sick entry that peaks the upper, maybe you can pick off your AWP with an AK headshot, some Nico type fucker. If you have a team that can just bang that low and get the bomb down all day long, yeah, it's going to be harder for the CTs with the retakes. But if you don't have any of these things, then yeah, CT should dominate, should be in a really good position. And so to me, those were the classic fights that you watch for on the map. You would see these 2 or 3 things happening. You would see the rotations. You could kind of guess as CT, but you're always kept a little bit guessing before the util came in. Also, yes, you think of long-range maps like that, CT7 map, usually AWP friendly, right? Yeah, the AWP was a very powerful weapon on this map, but it needed setup and support on both sides. If you try AWP on your own out of mid as T, they will push up on you, they will flash in, and people will rush you with MP9s, with pistols, and they can get you. But if you can get out and you have support from your team and you have the util and you have someone doing a flank at the ladder room or at the alley, the AWP can dominate the whole map. That's from T side. On CT side, the reason why you need support is basically no matter what site you're playing, if your teammates don't comp properly and watch their spots, you can get shot in the side of the head. You can get flanked from behind, outer. That's so rare on CT-sided maps. So again, the dynamic was really interesting. It took a lot of high-level understanding, good calls, good comms, and the skill to actually make these top weapons and roles work. Then also, in my opinion, because you had the long lines of sight, you could have dominance from the AWP. They could be incredibly powerful just by themselves. It's also a map, by the way. In theory, it can be trickier to save the AWP, right? Unless you just go out of the T exit. If you're on the CTs, they can push you in, they can chase you, can go for it. So you also, sometimes you want to gamble a little bit and hold the sights. Also, it showed for me who can actually split a site. If you can't split a site, and if you can't pull off the odd fake, you're going to have a very hard time getting T rounds on this map. And so good luck having to get 13 round CT side. Now you can't do anything. Now you're going to have to be perfect the whole way. You can't ever get your economy broken. You've got to win the early rounds and get a roll going. It demanded good CT rotations. Even though CTs are in their spots fairly quick, they're in good position. It doesn't matter. The point is the way that the Ts can set up for the fake and then go to the other side suddenly because they tend to spread out over the map. and especially the connections between mid and ladder room, it meant that you had to really know and com properly if you're the CTs. You can't just be fucking around and then think it's like, all right, it's just like Mirage or whatever, we're just going to rotate in for the 3v3. No. If you do that, there's so many off angles, someone can already be in. This is one of the maps where one of the things I love about this map as a CT-sided map is it's CT-sided initially, and there are all these off angles you can hold and spots, but if the Ts take a site, those off angles and spots become theirs. Remember, a terrorist that's planted the bomb becomes the defensive side now. So all of a sudden, you can't just really fast rotate into the site. You've got to hope you have some util. You've got to hope you have a teammate. You've got to hope you're not both just coming from the same direction. And there are so many spots to potentially check. And it made retakes as CT so exciting. It made it as T so that you could pull off some epic round wins at that inner site. Think of some of the great round wins of all time, especially if the T in a 1v2, 1v3 gets back up the inner ramp or the upper part from the ladder. If he gets up to that area, there are so many classic T numbers disadvantage wins. You can think of great rounds over and over and over from majors, from other tournaments. This was a map that had so many elements to it that were interesting. It wasn't just like the early part of the game's interesting. The late game can be interesting. Oh, the mid-round call. This was a map that had it all for me. And it wasn't like I said, it just biased one sort of team. Yeah, it was CT-sided, but T teams could really do a lot on the map too. Then also, you look historically, it's funny because now there's all these amazing CIS players, particularly from Russia. And yes, obviously Na'Vi had a dominant era after this map was removed. Cloud9's been a good team, but not the best. Spirit had their run on maps like Dust 2, etc. once they got through to PGL Antwerp Major. VP obviously won a major with a different lineup. But the sad thing is, you remember VP when they had Yekindar. This was on the maps that showed what a beast Yekindar was on T-side, where he could just run in and open the site, make it 5v4, and then all of a sudden that JMT style starts to get really effective. This is one of the better maps for Jim to play on, I always thought. Spirit themselves with a very different lineup. We're doing lots of interesting things on this map with like lesser talents overall, but like an interesting bunch of players that were somewhat veterans at this point in time, played a bunch of lands. Na'Vi, this is the lineup when they had Flamey going into the bit lineup. This was one of their better maps. This was one of the maps that they could have amazing games on. This is the one that Electronic did go ham on at, what was it, DreamHack, where they won it against Gambit in an epic, like massive, I think it was overtime game. Gambit themselves were really good on this map. This was one of the maps that they established themselves on as one of the best teams in the world. People like Shiro just tearing you up completely, winning Katowice and whatnot. But then what happened was, Na'Vi had a monster team once it got to land. They could survive. VP was in one of the worst metas over a year and a half later and won basically just with that style and against some bad teams. Spirit later had Dexter, and then obviously at one point in time later got Wonderful and Patsy and all these guys in and changed up the roster completely. It wasn't the Some Die Young era of the team at all. And then you go and you look. For me, the team that really suffered from this map going was Gambit, actually, the team that became Cloud9. When this map went out and Ancient came in, man, they've had so many ropey games on that one. They've had so many times they couldn't call. You remember IM Rio? They'd been in the semis if they've actually understood that we're doing on this map. It was just a disgrace. Whereas on Train, that actually was a map they could show their prowess on. That was a map where their skill could do something. That's a map where they had a sense for how to play it overall. By the way, there were some teams that had problems on this map. Like G2, the reason why they weren't in many finals and were always in the semis is because this is a map that they were so ropey on. They had real hard times because they had Amanek as their AWPer, didn't they? It just put way too much pressure on Nico. They weren't a team that used a lot of structure, and so some of the Nexa calls were dodgy. If you don't know, Vitality, who at the time were battling with Astralis in 2020 to be one of the best teams in the world, they were actually a team that used to just perma this map. It wasn't even one they played at all. So to me, the reason why I want this map back, aside from the fact it was a good map, and I think it was a mistake to remove it, is because you look at the map that came in, Ancient. This ain't the map. This ain't the map. Like, I have this angle that I say, a fact that'll tell me if a map's good is once it's been played for 6 months, a year, whatever, how many classic matches were on it? Matches that were like really high level, like back and forth, truly epic. There basically was, in my opinion, none on this map ever. There were close games, but none that were like truly great games until this IEM Dallas recently where ENCE played that mega overtime game against FaZe. That was a game with amazing like tactical calls, with teams understanding pressure points on the map, people doing like really interesting retakes, big ballsy players all over the place, people not just hitting one site over and over again. You think of some of the other maps that were the big games on this one. Right, yeah, you had Heroic versus Furia at IEM Rio 2022 Major, but that was more just exciting than a classic. That was Heroic up big from CT side, and then they just couldn't get over the line on T side because K Serato just went bonkers on CT and just shot everyone in the head. It wasn't a classic map, though. His performance might have been a classic. So to me, the thing I can't handle is this has made the map pool whack. Like, when you had this map around, you had like the 3 CT-sided maps traditionally, Nuke, Train, Overpass. Now, Nuke had become a lot less CT-sided because of the economy favouring Ts. Train was a little bit like that, and Overpass was still CT-sided. Then you had like the more middling maps. Like, look, CT is traditionally the side that wins out on most maps in history anyway, but these were more in the middle as the Mirages and the Infernos. Depends how good both teams are, really. You're going to get a lot of games where someone can get the 8, the 9 T rounds at times. Now, you used to have Dust 2, which was the traditional T-sided map. Obviously, that went bad at one point in time, and even that was CT-sided. But the reason why I like this one is, when you added in Vertigo, that was CT-sided in a way that was whack, and just made it really hard for T-side, and very boring. A lot of the same things iterated over and over again, the same couple of fights. Then you obviously brought in Ancient. I mean, who even knows what this map's supposed to be? I mean, in theory, at times it's T-sided. The retake game's really weird. I just find it's not a very satisfying map. And then Anubis, I think it's just teams aren't good enough at it. They just have never figured out the T-side overall. So you look at these maps, I think actually when you had this one in the pool, you had the Nuke, Train, Overpass that demanded good T-side teams exist. Not that many of them nowadays, is there? And the really strong fragging teams could still do a lot of work on these maps. It's why the map pool was really beautiful back then. And you had more, I think, expression between the two teams of their styles. That's another thing, because now the big issue for me is having all 3 of them at the same time. You have Ancient at the same time as Anubis, at the same time as Virgo. That's too much. Ancient's too wonky. It's just a million retake attempts. And now it's just bad saves that get hunted down. Anubis, nobody gets the T side of this map still. It's just played by the super strong CT teams or people wanting a cheeky gamble. Vertigo is too CT sided and way too small. It's just way too small. It's boring. It's one of the most boring maps ever in Counter-Strike. And you can only veto 2 maps in a series anyway, and you're probably not going to waste both on 2 out of these 3. So as a result, you're just going to see bad maps and bad play and series that don't really deserve to be classics, and orders of teams in the rankings, in the playoffs, that aren't the best teams, not having the best matches. I think some of the online games, excluding the fact they were online, because this map was in the pool for most of the time, would actually, some of them were better than some of these LAN matches we have now in the last 6 months. Also for me, this is one of the original Counter-Strike classic maps. Remember, we had the big 4 once we got out of playing stupid shit like Prodigy and Aztec and Mill and Fire. We had the 4 big ones with Dust 2, Inferno, Nuke, Train. These are original Counter-Strike maps from way back in the day. You can find this in all eras of Counter-Strike. So to me, I get that people don't like what happened to Dust 2 and it got removed, and a lot of people were glad about that. I would just try and rework these maps, because in my opinion, in a 7-map pool, I want these 4 classics in there. These should be called the big 4 in my opinion. And unless you're reworking one to bring it back, I don't think you should remove one of these 4. These 4 are the staples of Counter-Strike, and still have certain angles, setups, rotations, pressure, dynamics to the map that still remain to this day. There's still spots that are played the same way from age-old time. And that's not boring. There was a beauty and a mastery to having those. I also think, quite frankly, when we had the big 4, the 5th one that came in that made the map pool work in 1.6 was obviously Tuscan, a very T-sided map. But actually, I think Mirage just took the place of Tuscan in CSGO. That was obviously a bad map back when it was in CS 1.6. It was just a whatever map. No one really liked it. It was a different version. In CSGO, it became one of the better maps. It became one of the evener maps. It became a map that allowed skill expression, became a fragger map, but still with great CT rotations. Like, yeah, it might be a limited map, but it was fine. So if you have these 4 and maybe Mirage, or sometimes you swap that for a Cache or something like that, then you've got the workings of a good map pool. Now I can let you experiment. Maybe then you have Vertigo and Anubis, or maybe then you have Vertigo and Ancient. But I don't think you can have all 3. And missing Train, I do miss it. And I miss seeing what great players could do in it. I miss seeing what the AWPers could do, what the IGLs could do, what the entries could do, how the supports could all say. It was a map that tested every aspect of Counter-Strike, and it is a true classic. I often said in 1.6 Inferno was my favourite map, because I just noticed it produced so many classic games even then. Obviously in CSGO, people noticed the great decider map to have big finals on. But I actually think Train was the best map because of what it required from CT and the excellent playbook you could display as Ts. And every player on your team could be shown in his own way as a hero if he knew what he was doing. So I say, bring back Train. Whatever map you take out, hopefully not one of the other of the big 4, please can we have Train back? This is a map that we'd all love to see, I'm pretty sure. As Mary J. Blige said in her track, All I Need, You're all I need to get by, which is the case for me and my Patreon community who support this channel and these videos. Some of them include Theogony, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Ahmed Hadjou, Joseph Adcock, Tosh, Bot Pounder 420, Thooorin, Animosity, Tobias Bernasconi, Jensen Goh, Yurka, and a special thanks always to the main man, Jerky's Minion. Would you like to ask a question in my regular video AMA? Do you want teasers? Find out who upcoming guests are. Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content, or you want to take part in one of those longer esports discussions with me where we go all over the place. Well, if any of those grab your fancy, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Rajcula Illuminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.